Hi again, all. This is Tim Lightfellow in the Kingdom of Vontier as part of the Society for Creative Anachronism. Today's video is to show how to redo the center serving on a crossbow or handbow string. First thing I want to show you some of the tools. I use an X-Acto knife. I'll show you what for. I use some Fletch glue. I happen to use Duco cement, but whatever you use for Fletch glue, super glue, whatever. For crossbow string, I use a tape measure because I want the serving to be a certain distance from each end. We use a serving jig. This particular one happens to have crossbow serving on it. I also have one that has handbow serving. I'm not sure if the camera is going to show it very well, but the crossbow serving is thicker string than the handbow serving. That's because the crossbow tends to rub on the wood deck more, so it needs to be a little thicker, a little more resilient. Handbow, it's protecting against the arrow nock and the gloves, so it's generally not taking quite as much wear. Okay, so things to consider if you're doing crossbow strings. They can't be on the crossbow when you do it, yet you need to hold them taut. So what I'm doing here, let me angle the camera down to show you, is I am actually using my string making jig. This is for making crossbow continuous loop strings. And so I'm able to use it to hold tension and keep this fairly tight so I can do the work. For hand bows, you actually can string up the bow, let the bow do the work and hold the tension in the string for you. I'm going to see if I can find an angle where you can see the work I'm doing and see me, because it's kind of weird cutting myself off. So for hand bow, again, we're talking the center serving. So that's this area. An additional tool you may need if you're doing a handbow serving is knock pliers. You'll notice this pair on the very top, there's this kind of a wedge on this one tooth. And what that lets you do is get into the separation on the knock bead and pry it apart. If you're careful, you can reuse the knock bead. Depending on how much it's been used, you may end up having to throw it away and put a new one on. But other than pulling the knock bead off, putting the knock bead back on, the process of doing the serving is the same between crossbow and handbow. So I will demonstrate on the crossbow string because that is what I currently have that needs new serving. So the first thing is taking the old serving off, which is a tedious process of just unwrapping the serving that's currently on there. And you'll notice when I get to a certain spot here, it kind of wants to stick, and that's because the process I'm going to show you uses no knots to tie anything on or hold anything together. And so what I do is I put a little dab of glue where the string comes out, and that's why I mentioned using glue as part of the process. So old serving, there's that side. Get this side off. Nice thing again having it on a jig is it makes it a lot easier to work with because I can use both hands to get this done instead of trying to hold the string with one hand and pull the serving off with the other. Okay. And again, a little bit of glue at that end that I can feel it sticking. And there we go. Now you'll notice this string is pretty well used, so I can pretty much look at this and see that the serving goes from there to there. If I didn't have that, like say this was a newer string that I'd made and it just didn't have that kind of obviousness to it. For me, with crossbow, I measure in 11.5 inches from each side, and that's where I want the serving, because the deck of the crossbow is about 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 inches, and this gives me enough to cover that without going too far, because if you think about the way you're cocking a crossbow, you don't really want to stiffen the string up out too far, because that needs to be able to flex for it to reach the roller nut or the body where it's going to be locked into place. So I try to keep it as minimal as I can. I do want it far enough that as I'm grabbing it to cock it, I'm hopefully grabbing the serving and not the string. Because again, I'd rather put the wear on the serving. That's easier and cheaper to replace than remaking the whole string. Okay, so I'm going to grab the serving jig. I'm going to loosen it a little. I'm going to pull a little bit out, a couple inches or so, and tighten it back down. Now, what I do is I put a bit of a tail on the string, and this can be the challenging part, is now I need to loop it back, or loop it around the string, but I need it to loop back towards the tail that I'm holding. And it will want to not let you do that because it wants the twist to keep going that way. So it can be a little bit of a tricky thing to get that started. Okay, so I've got about 3 loops there. I'm going to loosen this just a bit. And I'm going to start twisting. Oh, that's the other thing you have to be careful of, is it can, especially as you're getting started, go over the top of itself. So what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to get about, see, did it again. I'm looking to get about 10 twists. Okay, which I just got, because that's right around 10. Now I'm going to take that tail and I'm going to pull it back and hold it back with that finger while I continue to do the twists using my other hand to control the jig. The tension on the jig is adjusted with that wing nut, so you'll want to make sure you keep the tension tight enough, because you don't want it to be loose wrapped around the string. You want it nice and tight. And once you kind of get it all going, it usually goes fairly quickly, because it usually just kind of wants to track and follow where it needs to lay down. And once you have the tension set, as long as you don't bang it, on most jigs it'll stay. I've worked with some jigs where they'll process, you keep adjusting the tension because it just doesn't seem to like to hold. So that's one reason I do recommend this particular type of jig, is it seems to be pretty solid in keeping the tension for you. The black one that I have the handbow string on is also good. The only issue I have with that particular one I got is it's an off-brand, and the hole for the string to come out the top is not right, so I need to drill that out a little because the string just barely fits. Most of the brands that look like that are not made that way, and they do hold the tension really well. So overall, good jig. I just have to modify the one I got. So once we're getting to the other end, when we're somewhere between about 1/4 and 1/2 inch short of the end, what I do is I pull out string. I'm going, I don't know, that's probably 10 inches or so. It may be too much, we'll find out. So I'm going to cut it. Now, here's the trick to doing this without a knot. We've been looping it across the top towards me, so we're going to keep doing that, but we're going to do a loop. We're going to go out a ways, and we're going to loop underneath back towards. So I'm looping it now back towards this, and I want to do 8 to 10 loops. Okay, now, and I'm keeping the tension on this because I don't want this to get loose. Now I hold the end over here, and I take this and I slowly spin it again and do the loops up tight. Again, I'm using my thumb, so every time I let go of this, I'm using my thumb to hold that tension so that it doesn't come loose. And then once I get to the end, I grab this and I pull it through, and that pulls it tight. I go to the other end, I just make sure that's tight. If you have trouble with that, if it's really extra hard to pull or anything, you can certainly use pliers or something to pull it through. Now, very carefully, because I don't want to cut the serving I just did, I'm going to cut off the tails that are sticking out. Okay. And then the last piece I'm going to do, so I'm going to take the Fletch glue. Again, if you use Fletch-Tite, I happen to use Duco cement. If you use super glue, doesn't matter. I'm going to put just a small dab of glue at each end just to help lock it in place if this glue isn't dried out. Just a very tiny amount if I can. Then I'm going to set the jig aside. I'm going to let the glue dry for about 10 to 15 minutes, and the serving is done. Again, if this were a handbow, there would be one more step, which would be putting on your knock bead back in place if you use a knock bead. And for that, you can use a bow square to measure where it needs to go, and then the knock pliers that I'd previously shown to crimp it in place. Hope this helps you. Have a good day.